Thanks very much. It really is a great honour to be invited to speak here. And thank you very much for listening. I hope you'll still be awake at the end. Now, I'm sure you all know this, but just about a week ago, the government published draft legislation which will pave the way for the retail banks, they're the ones that you and I have our current accounts with, to be ring-fenced from the investment banks, and they're the ones who gambled all the money away and created or sparked or at least contributed to, just got to be careful about liability, with the banking crisis. Now, funnily enough, this may come as a surprise, but the banks don't seem altogether too happy about this arrangement. In fact, they'd rather leave things to the way they are, if it's okay with the rest of us, while they get on with the important business of changing the banking culture in Britain. So that's the banks that caused the crash would like to look after the changing of the banking culture in Britain all on their own, if it's okay with you, by leaving everything alone. So that's fine. And it's not surprising, actually, that they're resistant to this change, because over the course of the banking crisis, there's a truism that appears to have evolved, which is probably macroeconomically correct. There are economists in the audience, I know. I offended them earlier by not knowing anything about economics. And that's this idea that the banks are too big to fail. Now that's obviously fine, but I'm not entirely sure, what the problem is here. The fact is, the banks actually, what they're really worried about is if they get broken up, they're not too big to fail. Because what's happened during the banking crisis is, so far, we have all spent 1.2 trillion pounds, in fact, propping up a decrepit banking system in order to keep them afloat so there wasn't a huge crash. 1.2 trillion pounds. Meanwhile, we've all suffered the economic and social upheaval of paying for that, and it hurts now, and it's likely to echo into the future. Now, so the idea of being too big to fail is sustaining the way the banking system is now, and it's cost us 1.2 trillion pounds. Now, I don't tend to agree with this view, that they are too big to fail. I think the problem we have is that the idea that the banks are too big to fail has become the law, almost. And I think that's what needs to be changed. So, we could do that ourselves, because I think actually, I'm not convinced that reforming the banking industry in the way that's being proposed is necessarily going to transform banking culture in Britain and make banking better. I think the only way to change the way that banking in Britain works is changing the way that Britons are able to bank. And we could do that ourselves today. We could go home after this and we could close our bank accounts and move it somewhere else. But we saw in the audience earlier on how many people had bank accounts, and it's most of you. You could close your bank account tonight and move your money, but where are you going to move it to? Well, you could move to a building society, of course, which are at least are mutually owned by their members. But even building societies these days, many of them extend the provision of products and services beyond their membership base. So they serve people beyond their membership. So in my opinion, that's distracted. And it's not really the kind of bank that I personally would like to join. In fact, the design principles that I'm interested in are, I'd like a bank in which I had a stake and which others around me had a stake, and that only ever acted in my interests or in the interests of the people who I bank with. So they only ever look after their own customers, not peripheral interests. So that's the kind of bank that I'd like to have. Now, the problem with this is that the banks are too big to fail. But if the bank that we really want doesn't actually exist, or the one that I want at least, it's a personal preference, we have to start a bank that does do what I would like it to do. So how do you start a bank? Does anybody know how you start a bank? Okay, well, nor did I. So I went online, I Googled how to start a bank. Because that's where everybody starts these days. And there's not a lot of information out there. In fact, very little constructive information. You can try it yourselves later. You can find out how to do it in the US, but very little in the UK. Now, so I Googled it. And there is no books available. You know, there's no how to start a bank for dummies, for example. And so I began to wonder why that was. Well, it turns out, of course, that actually the launch of a bank in the UK is extremely rare. The last bank that was launched was Metro Bank back in 2010, just 2 years ago. But prior to that, it was more than a century before the last bank, before Metro Bank was actually launched. So it's not just a once-in-a-lifetime experience. It's a once-in-two-lifetimes event, the launch of a bank in Britain. And so I wonder why that was as well. So I got in touch with Metro Bank, because they were the last bank to launch, and I asked them, how do you start a bank? And they said it's really very simple. Well, they didn't actually say that, they said it's quite complex. But what you need is £75 million. £75 million. And that's not necessarily in order to operate. That is just to obtain what's called a banking license. So you need a banking license in order to reassure the FSA, which is the Financial Services Authority who authorise banking in Britain, that you have the money, you have the capital necessary if the bank goes bust to give all your depositors with their current accounts their money back. But you also need to make sure that if there's a run on your bank, you actually are able to make sure, run by the way, is where lots of people turn up on the same day and try and take all their money out, that you're able to sustain that run without causing repercussions to the rest of the banking network, which is what leads to a crunch. So 75 million quid. I mean, I have that burning a hole in my back pocket, obviously. And I think this is symptomatic of the problem, that actually if you want to change banking in Britain, you either have to be independently wealthy and have a fetish for banks, or you have to be an institutional investor who's willing to invest. So that doesn't quite cut. And so I got perplexed by this, and I mooched around on Facebook for a little while, and it was while I was doing that, I started to think about Facebook's model, Facebook's brand, how they design their brand. And it occurred to me that actually it's described as a social network, but Facebook isn't a social network, it's a means for people to connect with one another in order to create their own social networks. So it struck me that that's how potentially you could transform banking, because it seems to me that we have a 19th century approach, an establishment approach to creating banks in the 21st century world where the technology is all around us that enables us to connect. It got me started thinking about what a bank really was. So earlier on before the talk, I was able to ask you, obviously, which banks you were with and stuff like that. And if you look at this room from the point of view of which bank brands you were with, it's multicoloured. And it looks like this. But if you take the brands away, and you debrand the debit cards that you hold with your bank, what are you left with then? Well, you end up with a room full of people with debit cards, obviously. A room full of people with debit cards, but actually more than that, you've got a room full of cards that all do the same thing, so there's no difference between them. And you have, in effect, you have a population of people who are able and have the means to gain access to banking services. So who says that you actually need a bank? You simply need the technology necessary to form a bank. Banking technology. No need for the bank at all. So in other words, we could be a bank. There's no reason why we shouldn't be a bank. In fact, we could be a kind of bank. We could be what's known as a credit union, where individuals gather together. They are able to borrow and save and so on and so forth. And it's founded on the principles of thrift. We could get together and we could do that. And the best thing about that model, the brilliant thing about the credit union model, is you own it. We would all own it. And at the end of each year, if the credit union is in profit, we all gain a bonus in the form of a dividend. So we could all get bankers' bonuses instead of just the bankers getting bankers' bonuses. There is a catch, though. In order to form a credit union, you have to have a common bond. The members of it have to demonstrate a common bond, like a profession or a location or possibly even a workplace. And if you don't fit a common bond, you can't join a credit union. So if you're out on a limb and you can't join a credit union, you could create a credit union you could create a credit union by gathering together enough people to create a common bond, but it would take you anything up to 5 years to be authorised by the FSA to to be a bank, or at least to trade. So it rather explains why in the United Kingdom there may well be 600 credit unions in the United Kingdom, but it's dwarfed by far more than 9,000 bank branches. Credit unions just don't have the distribution, and it's very difficult for people to join. So I have this idea that if you join the credit unions together, we could use technology to do some amazing things. So, for instance, what if we were to create a platform, a technology platform, which allowed us to join together all the credit unions in the United Kingdom so that they were able to pool their assets into one place, and that they were then able, therefore, to be more competitive in the market. Because in fact, where credit unions exist and where they're large enough, they're actually incredibly competitive with the banks, and they can beat the mainstream banks. But what if also with a technology platform, by cleverly connecting people, we were able to embed in the technology platform the means by which banking services, which are very difficult for credit unions to offer, are actually embedded in the technology, so that an individual or a group of people wanting to form a credit union could use those tools that are embedded in a national platform in order to build their own credit union. And thirdly, what if we were able to give credit unions the ability to groups of individuals to get together to form a credit union which could go through a process of authorization using a banking technology platform, or a technology platform, in order to form their own, in order to go through the FSA regulation process step by step, so therefore speeding up that process. And then finally, what if we extended the common bond that credit unions are currently restricted to, so that more people could join, so that it extended to citizens of Great Britain as a whole, so that those people, so that citizens in the United Kingdom could, was the basis of the common bond. What that would mean at the moment, what happens is that because credit unions are geographically dispersed, because it's not easy to join them for a single individual, if you're able to create a credit union platform on which, through which people could join, then it would make the ability to move your money from a bank into a credit union much, much easier. And there is a precedent for this kind of technology in Britain. In the pensions market, what has happened is that there was a time where you would go to a pension provider in order to purchase a pension product. But over the last decade or so, something like £90 billion worth of pensions assets have moved from pension providers and pension products via technology into what's known as investment platforms. It's just the kind of thing I'm talking about, so that the assets of pension platforms now sit in a single space. And what that means is that individuals and their advisors are able to design their own pension products for the first time, because they have access to information and funds which allows them in effect to design their own pensions and savings products. Now, I've got a meeting with the FSA coming up where I'm going to float this idea with them. But what I'm really keen to ask them is this: that if you're able to collate the assets of all the credit unions in Britain in one place, on one cleverly connected technology platform, is it possible to get past the problem of having to raise £75 million in order to start a bank? Because one of the big problems for credit unions, and the idea of a credit union, is not all of them can offer the kinds of mainstream transactional banking services that we're all used to with our banks. But by getting around the issue of the license and embedding current account banking, debit card issuing, direct debits and standing order into a nationalised, nationalised not in that sense, credit union platform, then I think we have the ability to create a bank in which we have a stake, which we own, and which doesn't behave as irresponsibly as the banks have done in the past. Now, I think we deserve that because we've spent £1.2 trillion so far propping up a banking system that doesn't work. And as a result of that, I think our parliamentarians owe it to us to do that. It's not all the bank's fault, the reform of the banking system. I think it's very easy to keep bashing the bankers over this. I think what Britain deserves is a decent debate in public, because it's the FSA that authorises banking. And the FSA is answerable to Parliament. So our politicians, having spent £1.2 trillion worth of money, has a responsibility not just to reform the banking system the way it is, but to consider opportunities and ways of designing banking services so that they suit us not from the 19th century, but in the 21st century. So in other words, enough of the sort of banker bashing. Let's be positive about what we can do. And in fact, let's be banking instead. Thank you very much.